Hi, I'm Peter Caldas, President and CEO of the American Society on Aging, and welcome to Season 5 of Future Proof, ASA's webcast with changemakers in aging. This season, Lisa Marsh Ryerson, President of AARP Foundation, joins us as guest host of 5 episodes exploring innovative approaches to fighting poverty with leaders in the community and how these approaches can build opportunity across generations. We're delighted to be partnering with AARP Foundation on this series as we launch a year of programming on advancing economic security and how it intersects with aging, equity, and innovation. We hope you enjoy this episode, and please join us all season long.
Hi, my name is Bill Rivera, and I'm Senior Vice President for Litigation at AARP Foundation. Through our legal advocacy arm, AARP Foundation Litigation, we advocate in federal and state courts across the country to drive social change for people 50 and older, particularly those who are vulnerable or have low incomes. I'm stepping in for Lisa Marsh Ryerson as guest host of Future Proof for today's conversation with Audra Wilson, President and CEO of the Shriver Center on Poverty Law. I'm excited to speak with Audra today as we discuss what legal advocacy is, how it can impact outcomes, and how organizations and nonprofits of all sizes and types can support legal advocacy efforts. Audra Wilson has been a champion for racial and economic justice for more than 20 years as a public interest lawyer and teacher, policy shaper, community mobilizer, and experienced executive manager. Throughout her career, Audra has focused on the voices and experiences of communities of color and communities most affected by injustice. Audra began her career at the Shriver Center on Poverty Law as a welfare advocacy staff attorney. She also worked on the U.S. Senate campaign for then State Senator Barack Obama, in higher ed at Northwestern Pritzker School of Law, and in the office of Congresswoman Robin Kelly. She also led the League of Women Voters in Illinois and has done so much more. As the president and CEO of the Shriver Center on Poverty Law, Audra is a leader in the fight for economic and racial justice. The Shriver Center litigates, shapes policy, and trains and convenes multi-state networks of lawyers, community leaders, and activists nationwide to build a future where all people have equal dignity, respect, and power under the law. Audra, welcome to Future Proof.
Thanks for having me.
Audra, I'm delighted to be with you. You and I have each spent years advocating on behalf of low-income communities, including in the courts, and now we each lead organizations that do so. As you know, it can have tremendous impact and just be so incredibly rewarding for us in the trenches who do this day to day, and it really is just an honor and a privilege to be able to do that. But not everyone knows what legal advocacy is or how it works. So can you walk us through what the role of legal advocates is in helping those in poverty, including older adults, through legal advocacy?
Sure. So in a nutshell, legal advocacy, or think of it as advocacy through the courts, it uses the judicial system to advance social change goals. So we can do this by bringing forward a legal case in the court that focuses on improving a situation for a particular group of disadvantaged people. So a classic example of legal advocacy would be one that almost everyone's familiar with, let's say Brown versus Board of Education. And that is the pivotal case that kickstarted the school desegregation movement. And that's a great classic example of legal advocacy. And this is a case that argued that separate schools were inherently unequal in an era where legislation on school integration was unlikely to change. So that was an example of using the power of the courts to motivate some great social change.
And I know we're very proud of the work that we've done at AARP Foundation and partnering with Shriver Center in cases of significance in the U.S. Supreme Court and in courts throughout the country, and working on amicus, or friend of the court briefs, for example. Can you tell us a little bit about amicus briefs?
Certainly. So when legal service organizations are filing cases, it's one thing to have the the legal principles, everything that's involved. But essentially, it's like as you said, friend of the court, translated. It's having support from grassroots and other entities that are impacted by the particular case or the matter of the case at hand, to be able to lend support for the argument that's being made. So periodically, people will be asked to, Shriver has, and we have asked others to lend that support to bolster our cases, basically, when we're appealing to a particular court.
And they really can have such a tremendous impact in Brown versus Board of Ed and lots of other cases today, especially in the US Supreme Court, where so many people want to be able to provide that additional perspective, the big picture, and really help inform the judge's decision-making, right?
Absolutely. They can be very powerful. And it's a great way for even non-legal service-oriented folks, but organizations can still be very impactful. And it's one of the many ways in which we rely upon our grassroots partners in this advocacy space.
It's a great segue into my next question for you, Audra. So tell us how legal advocacy can complement other advocacy strategies, for example, grassroots organizing and legislative advocacy and public awareness, education, and so on.
Sure. So legal advocacy in many ways can be a really great kind of synergistic partner to more traditional advocacy strategies. So it's especially impactful when it's done in concert with legislative advocacy. So when we are appealing our lawmakers to be able to create laws or to change laws that are impacting a certain issue or a certain community. It is very impactful when it comes to grassroots mobilizing, public awareness and education, and even media campaigns. So all these different strategies can partner very well with legal advocacy and actually bolster the type of advocacy that we're doing. So one example that I had read about, even just thinking about our conversation, was the campaign that was used to end stop and frisk practices in New York City. And so that was an example of using several different strategies to advance a legal strategy. When the case was being tried, advocates work with grassroots advocates to fill the courts every day, and then legislative advocates to push through some of the supplementary policies to expand the law on discriminatory policing. So when it comes to making these kind of major shifts and changes in the law, having the power of all these different types of advocates can really help to move the needle forward in a way that possibly wouldn't be done if it was solely based upon legal advocacy.
Absolutely. I know that we at AARP Foundation often work with our colleagues at AARP, both at the federal level and then at the state level, to try to think about what are all the tools in the toolbox that we can bring to bear on a particular issue. And we'll refer to the three-legged stool of advocacy, legislate, regulate, litigate. And we know the courts can be very slow, so that's not necessarily going to be the first tool you pull out. And you can really be fighting these battles in numerous courts for many years, and it's not inexpensive to do that either. So it is definitely helpful to think about all those different tools that we can bring, and really think about other ways, as you said, Audra, and maybe you can expand a little bit on the idea for those who aren't directly involved in legal advocacy, how they can really support that legal advocacy community through partnering. And you gave some examples, but I know that so much of the work, as you talked about in the stop and frisk example, really comes from building that support and even just letting people know what the issue is in the first place from the ground level up.
So it's interesting because when we're thinking about identifying particular situations or problems that are impacting a group of people, I mean, it's so important to make sure that first and foremost, we are hearing directly from those impacted communities. And many of the grassroots organizations with whom we work closely are the ones that are actually lifting up these voices of individuals who are impacted. They're the ones that are have their boots in the ground, and they're the first ones to identify some particular problems. So we might know or have heard of some of these things, but when we can actually reach out to our partners who can actually say, not only are you hearing correctly, here are some individuals who've been directly impacted. here's some of the work that we've been doing on the ground to be able to address this. It's very important. Sometimes legal service organizations have the challenge of almost being in the ivory tower, so to speak. We are thinking of these legal strategies, we're thinking of preparing for court, but we are disconnected sometimes from the community itself. We're not sure of some of the nuances of a particular issue. And as lawyers, sometimes our challenge is that we're thinking in a very linear way about how we're going to approach our cases, but we don't always think about what are the implications of what we're doing. What are some of those nuances that we're not aware of? We might be seeking a certain type of redress in the court, a certain outcome, but have we thought about, well, how might this outcome fare for some other communities or impact some other areas that we haven't thought about? So it's so important to have that voice, of folks who are in closer to the ground, especially going through grassroots organizations, to make sure we've thought of every single possible permutation of this situation and its outcome that we might not have thought of had we only been just thinking solely about legal, angles and legal perspectives and the way that we're going to approach this in our usual kind of legal way. And that's one of the reasons why I love doing public interest work, because it really is a wonderful marriage of all different folks who are motivated to move the needle forward in some particular issue. But the combination of all these individuals and these different entities makes sure that we're really looking at this in a very holistic way and not in just a very linear way.
Yes, some excellent points that you just brought up there, Audra. At the end of the day, all of our big picture impact systemic litigation is about real people. And we really need to understand what the problem we're trying to address is and make sure that we are first doing no harm like a doctor, but also really trying to say, hey, we want to do some really good work here. These are important issues that we need to make sure we get right, not just in a legal Title 42, USC, blah, blah, blah kind of way, but really about the people on the ground. Are they going to be able to live better lives because of our work, our advocacy, our ability to tell their stories in a meaningful and compelling way and really drive the law forward to represent them as best we can, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I sometimes say that you can't really to build a strategy, a meaningful strategy to advance change if you're not including your partners. And sometimes what happens in this, especially with certain legal service organizations, they can almost become like the proverbial ivory tower. We never want a situation, and we're very sensitive to this at the Shriver Center, that we are dictating what the outcome should be for a particular community. Instead, we want to be informed by the communities that are impacted, telling us here are what our needs are. And we take what those needs and what they've identified and combine that with our legal expertise and our ability to be able to navigate the courts or leverage our relationship with lawmakers to be able to effectuate change. So it has to come from all ends. It cannot be a top-down approach.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know in a lot of our cases that we've been very proud of, in age discrimination cases and employment or housing and disability discrimination cases and consumer protection cases, it really does matter to understand, and it takes time to develop these cases to really understand them as well as the law. The law can be complex alone, but having the opportunity to really understand how it affects people on the day-to-day level, and then know what it is that we need to be driving towards to make it better, so that it's not just a theoretical exercise about something that'll be really nice fodder for a law review article, but might not actually help people in the long run on a practical level. Absolutely.
And unfortunately, we can make fun of ourselves as lawyers, but we sometimes get ourselves in trouble with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So is there a particular success story from your work with the Shriver Center, either from early in your career when you were a staff attorney or now as president and CEO, that you really think is a good illustration of how legal advocacy can really have a great impact on outcomes and really improve people's lives?
To be honest, Bill, there are so many examples to choose from. because that's really the crux of what we do at Shriver Center. I mean, there has been no type of litigation we have undertaken without working in partner and concert with our partners, our grassroots partners. So examples of working with our grassroots partners to some degree of success, I started in June of 2020, so relatively short time ago. And it's interesting because one of the biggest successes we had, even in just the early throes of the pandemic, was the ability to expand health coverage for undocumented seniors in the state of Illinois, and being the first state to do so, which was a huge, huge step for us. But we did not do this alone. We were working in coalition with a lot of our partners who are working directly with immigrant communities and immigrant families, as well as other folks who are working in kind of the healthcare justice sector, along with our legal advocacy. And it's the combination of working together is how we were able to move this forward. And now what we're doing is trying to expand that to now below the age of our seniors, but to get that as down, I think, as early as 18. So basically coverage for undocumented immigrants, health coverage. Another coalition that we work closely with is the Protecting Immigrant Families in Illinois. And this was meant specifically to resist the changes from the public charge rule, for which there is a lot of controversy. Essentially, the public charge rule is a way to be able to say that immigrants who, even legal immigrants who are availing themselves of any sort of public benefits, this could actually work to their detriment when seeking citizenship, because they're deemed to be a public charge or a burden somehow, on the taxpayers that could actually impede their ability to, as they're seeking full citizenship. And that was a very large kind of coalition, including the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights and the Latino Policy Forum and Legal Counsel for Health Justice and the Shriver Center on Poverty Law. And we had modeled our coalition after the National Protecting Immigrant Families campaign. So one huge success that came out of that was one of the many lawsuits that were filed federally to counteract the public charge rule, and to have the motion that we had granted, or the brief that we had filed, upheld to basically eradicate this. And so that was a huge, huge success for us, but not us singularly. Again, it's thinking about the coalition and who the coalitions represent. So you have a combination of legal service providers, you have a combination of other sorts of grassroots advocates who are working in this space, and health justice folks, to mobilize and to have such a big win. So these are just small examples of the ways in which coalitions work, but it would not have been as successful or successful at all had they not been working in concert with each other to develop strategies, and then each and every one plays their role in kind of moving the ball forward.
Well, those are some pretty big examples, Audra, I have to say, and thank you so much for being the champion that you are and that you have been. And that's a great example to close on, really drawing together some of the intersectional connections of aging and immigration status and ethnicity, race, and so on, that oftentimes need to be addressed in order for us to maximize our opportunity for success.
Well, it's just exciting to see it in action. And for advocates who are listening to this, I hope to draw inspiration, because it is a wonderful thing to see the fruits of your labor. And it's long, it's hard, but it's great to have a coalition that is supportive and encouraging each other along the way. And then to be able to now inspire coalitions or similar coalitions in different parts of the country to be moving things forward.
Well, Audra, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been my pleasure to guest host this episode of Future Proof, and I want you to tune in next Wednesday for the final episode of the season, as Lisa wraps up with an incredible conversation about how hope can be used as a powerful tool to fight poverty. She'll be joined by Dr. Valerie Mahomes, researcher and author of Fostering Resilience and Wellbeing in Children and Families in Poverty: Why Hope Still Matters. Thank you.